one and all present here. Indeed, it's always been pleasure. On the days of budget, from at least 2006, very meticulously we started seeing budget. Always it used to be a discussion on both direct taxes and indirect taxes. I think in the same fashion it is getting continued over the last 3 years. A discussion on indirect taxes is really relevant or not is a subject matter of discussion by itself. In fact, when I was stepping in for the purpose of discussion, உனக்கும் எனக்கு என்ன வித்தியாசம் கணேஷ் அப்படின்னு தான் கேட்டே ஆரம்பிச்சாங்க. வந்து மொமெண்டோ வாங்கி போகிறேன் அவ்வளோதான். Now, when we get into this aspect of all those, are we seriously having some proposals on the indirect tax? I think by the time when the finance minister started to speak, discuss about all the 3 pillars, 16-point agenda for agricultural without any specific allocations and getting into one after the other aspects, by the time touching up on part B direct tax proposals, it was 1 o'clock. See, I respect everybody's physical ability, all that, and touched upon the major aspects of direct taxes. I still have 2 more pages. Prior to that, I will close. Those 2 pages were the pages relating to all those customs related matters. One of the aspects of the economic survey was Assemble in India for the World relating to networks. Now, that is got reflected in the customs related amendments where they made a point very clear. All those mobile telecom related parts which are going to be imported, customs duty is going to get reduced. Similarly, from the Customs Act front, yes, they are planning for a business regeneration or somewhere the thoughts relating to that manufacturing aspects or assembling aspects has to happen in a more way in India. Completely the preferential rate of duty notifications has been completely taken up, analyzed, studied. Wherever possible, they have deleted some of the preferential rate of tax which was already available and new models brought in. And again, one of the very recent modality which was brought in by World Customs Organization, which is a tariff quota rate allocation, which was also brought in here with regard to safeguard duty. So those aspects are the major aspects. Coming back on more specifically, I think somehow the finance minister is very clear. Buy organic food which are grown in India and consume those organic foods. So somewhere those thoughts are all very strong. Why? Because if someone is going to buy a imported cheese, henceforth he is going to pay 40% customs duty as against 15% customs duty. No, I want only, I don't want almonds, I want only walnut, 100% customs duty from 30% which was earlier. Followed by, it could be all those edible related item. It could be maize, it could be your whey, it could be the protein which has been imported, or it is going to be butter, cheese, which are all going to be imported, are the preferential rate which was earlier and reducing the rate, all have been increased substantially for the purpose of living. So those are the rate corrections when it comes to the increase front that have came, including the inorganic chemicals rate has been increased from the current preferential rate of 5% as against the original 10% duty. Now it has been increased to 7.5%. So on the front, when it comes to the reduction, yes, reduction is given for telecommunication and electronic vehicle parts and electronic vehicles. Yes, there is a rate reduction to encourage on those fronts, and few products relating to solars and PCBs and specific exemption relating to use of respective organization in the front of electricity. Yes, it is getting reduced. But for it, yes, there were no changes associated with relating to the rates aspect. Getting into specifically on the customs law, all along there was a levy called a safeguard duty. Whenever there is going to be a huge import, then yes, government would step in and say, this import is going to affect my country, because of that reason I levy a safeguarded duty, additional duty, apart from the basic customs duty and all that. Today, safeguard duty is going to be there. but the model of levying safeguard duty is being brought into tariff quota rate. What is this tariff quota rate? Earlier, measuring it was difficult. Now as a government, I will go look into my last 3 years, how much quantity is getting imported as a nation, and in case I would fix a quota. Let's say for example, a particular product up to 30,000 units can be imported. Under a preferential rate, I would say up to 30,000 units, preferential rate of tax of customs duty will be 10%. If it is going to cross that, then yes, there would be a safeguard duty. So my point over here is certain imports are going to be henceforth going to be little more conscious, and almost majority of the tariff schedule on the import is being touched. A welcoming move from the export is there is going to be a new ledger that is going to be created called as electronic duty credit ledger. Like this is an inspiration comes from GST, there is an electronic credit ledger. In the same fashion they have brought in. But the most interesting aspect of it is people who are all going to export are going to be further incentivized for the excise duty and the VAT paid on the fuel, and also on the electricity tax that is paid on the electricity that is used. So to that extent there is going to be a remission eligible. That remission will be credited to this account, and the respective importer, for his import he can use this amount for the purpose of paying his customs duty, and also like all our duty scripts, all that regular models, it can also be transferred to another person. So that is on the one front, yes, there is a welcoming move from the perspective of the customs and relating to exports. Broadly, these are the broader changes from the customs law that they have put forth and went and touched up about GST. Some of this trend has been set by the government over the last 2 budgets. In every budget, we will make a CGST and IGST amendment. It will be placed, it will get approved, and next year it will get implemented. So CGST Amendment Act 2018 got implemented in 1st February 2019. CGST Amendment Act 2019 got amended again now during is effective from 1st January 2020. In the same fashion, they came out and told we are introducing from 1st of April. So it is now becoming certain because they told in the budget and all that they will introduce simplified GST return. With due respects, how far it is going to be simplified, when it is going to be really implemented and enforced, yes, we can say as of now, name and all is simple. Okay, Sahaj, Sugam, normal return. Sahaj return, it will be Sahaj, Sahajamar. Sugam return, Sugamar. The model is like that. Okay, names and all is like this. But again, how far it is going to be really, because it comes with a little rider where a particular return is applicable if you are engaged only in B2C. If an organization is exclusively engaged in B2C, then only he can pick up a return called as Sugam. If organization is engaged only in B2B and B2C, then only he can get into Sahaj. If an organization has every window open, I will do e-commerce operator, I will do interstate supply, I will do B2B, I will do B2C, I will do every options that is available in the earth, then for him he has to file normal return only, which is going to have regular challenges that are associated with it. So my humble submission, when it comes to GST 2.0 return, when it comes only we will know. But as of now, the challenges are all high, and there was a unique extension. In fact, people have been asking us, 3, 5, 7 for this annual return got increased. What is the logic behind it? Nothing. All along we were dividing South India, North India, East India, West India. Now a new division came up. South Center India, North West India, North East India. So 3 groups, 3 different dates, and somehow as long as the server protects the others from filing it, yes, this date logical. Otherwise it will come up with its own challenges associated with it. Parking, a topic which is not as part of it. Some serious amendments have been made associated with it. On the CGST amendment tax which are placed, 2 amendments which I feel it little more important from the GST perspective. To start with, some basic amendment, Ladakh, which is a new union territory formed, subsection 214 is getting amended to include Ladakh, which is just to introduce that yes, this is also going to be a union territory. Composition levy. I'm sure all of us are aware, benefit which was given under GST for all those small-time traders. But one challenge in composition levy was there, whether a person opting composition levy can do other services. For which last year, I'm sure all of us can remember, last year there was an amendment which came out and told, yes, you can do services up to 10% of your turnover or rupees 5 lakhs, whichever is less. Now, they made a small correction in it, that services should be only intrastate services and he should not do e-commerce operator services. So how the earlier interpretation was, my goods has to be intra, my services can be inter and intra. Henceforth, after this amendment which is made or proposed to be made through this finance bill, this will change that aspect, that the goods, the services, both has to be intra. It cannot be, I cannot do services both intra and inter. One, yes, that is one of the hit point when it comes to the composition levy. The second most major hit point is a retrospective amendment proposed in section 140 of CGST Act, which is effective from 1st July 2017. Now what is this retrospective amendment? Consciously they are adding a word. The credit need to be claimed within the time prescribed from the appointed day. Let me repeat, within the time prescribed. What is this time prescribed? Time prescribed is prescribed in the respective rules. Now this amendment I personally see to overcome Gujarat High Court decision on transactional credit, where the Gujarat High Court came out and held that there is no time limit and they stuck down the rule. So this is a conscious move, and because of this retrospective amendment, can subsequent decisions can take a U-turn, or can government can go and fight all those aspects of transactional credit related issues of 140 is up and down relating to it. Apart from this, as usual, the new models that are going to get implemented from 1st April 2020, amendments for all this are all placed more effectively and more consciously on the aspects of GST. One, which is going to be e-invoicing, which becomes mandatory for all those organizations whose turnover is going to be more than 100 crores and it is effective from 1st April 2020. And the invoice raised by an organization whose previous year turnover does not exceed 100 crore, and if he issues an ordinary invoice, it will not be treated as an invoice. Only a e-invoice has to be treated as an invoice, where an invoice which contains the invoice reference number. For various reasons and the specific GST fraud report tabled on the Parliament somehow brought into a conclusion that majority of organizations who are involved in GST frauds, their turnover was on an average more than 100 crores. A total of 12,964 crore rupees of GST dues were there being through frauds. And this report came out and told all comes from organizations whose turnover. That was the broader sketch behind introducing e-invoicing in case of B2B transaction. No, it is going to be a B2C transaction of an 100 crore organization. Very simple, it should have a QR code. For all this, amendments are also being brought in associated with it. These are all the major aspects relating to the changes that they have brought in, and introduction of a new cess through this finance bill called as health cess. Every year they want to somehow feed this bigger policy of country called as Ayushman Bharat. It has to be fed. If all of us can remember that suddenly they will speak about the health of the people in the budget. Then they introduced a new cess called as social welfare surcharge in the last budget, which it was being introduced. Why suddenly people speak about the health care of it? Then we had a modest levy of social welfare surcharge. One advantageous move is about more than 34 items are removed from social welfare surcharge. Healthcare related, more specifically medical equipments alone are liable for a health cess changes which will be used for the purpose of funding Ayushman Bharat. Those are the major changes associated with this new levy which comes through this finance bill, and as usual tinkering of cigarettes and tobacco, both in terms of excise duty NCCD and in terms of customs duty NCCD, excluding leaving BD was the only thought about it, because I think it's a common man's touch point. They felt and probably they have not touched it. Cigarettes and all substantially they increase. Somewhere they have to rope in their 1,45,000 crores and 25,000 crores which they have given back. I think always these are all the soft targets to ensure, and being a sin good which they have ensured that it would get increased. Broadly, these are all the small changes that they have brought in from the perspective of customs and relating to GST. Maybe this would be a small caution point of mine relating to this budget. People who are all enjoying preferential rate of duty, organizations, whoever organizations might be, they are all enjoying or aligned themselves through some trade agreements which are signed between India and Sri Lanka, India and Indonesia, India and Taiwan. Based on that, they are importing goods, or they are using some of those benefits, or I am importing from this country based on the origin certificate. Those organizations have to be little more conscious on their costing aspects associated with it from this customs law. But for it, nothing major changes in terms of the aspects of customs law, and GST changes are all just proposed, which all will take it effect on the near future which is going to come. These are all the major changes in this bills which are being placed before the Parliament. I thank all of you for effective and patient listening, and thank the organizers for giving us the opportunity to share a few thoughts on.
Good morning. A few days back during my morning walk, I bumped into P. Anand, and in the course of a very casual conversation, what will you talk when you are in the morning walk? It's a casual conversation. He let it slip in that I should be a speaker in this program. It's a mistake I only later realized, having said yes to him. I wanted to wriggle out, but he said no. Between him and G. Subramaniam, they have decided that I should be before you this morning. So I was only reminded of the olden days in cricket in 1977 when India toured to Australia. The Australian team had moved to a different circuit of playing cricket, so they didn't have anybody to play in the main team. So they imported people who had retired, like the gentleman who had retired 10 years ago. They brought him back to captain the Australian team. So similarly, Anand has tried to bring me back onto the speaking circuit after a long lapse of maybe 8 to 10 years.
But Ranga never retires.
Thanks. So you have one other well-wisher like Nagarajan who will rope me into things like this. See, the budget was presented in the backdrop of very serious economic challenges, as we saw in the very descriptive presentation of Mr. Shekhar, where almost all indices were looking down and the problems were very much to the fore. And the expectations from the general public as well as from the expert community of economists, the business people and the professionals was running at a very ununderstandably exaggerated level of looking for some kind of a magic by which all these problems which are plaguing the economy would be wished away. I think if you can take a deep breath and look at the issues which had caused this kind of gradual slowdown, which over the last few quarters has resulted in very poor economic growth on almost all fronts. One would have realized that I don't think there is any magic solution which could have brought about a complete transformation to the mood and sentiments which is currently affecting the country. The finance minister actually has very little leeway in a country like India to play around as far as the budget is concerned. almost 90% of the revenue receipts are already earmarked for specific expenditure. There is very little flexibility a finance minister gets to deal with changing the allocation, redirecting the way the money is spent. This is the history over the last 70 years. If you trace back, there is a serious constraint in terms of how much a finance minister can do. The leeway allowed is very little, and that is hardly sufficient in times like this to completely change the course and especially to change the mood. So a person who has been seeing the budget making process and looking at the various era when budget making has happened, I would tend to think that most of us commit the mistake of expecting some miracle, some magic, which generally is not possible in a given situation of a government where there are so many pulls and pressures and limitations in terms of how much a finance minister can do at his or her level in completely changing the course. But my own honest impression is this budget, in an overall sense, is perhaps one of the better ones that I have seen in the last about 8-10 years. And I have my own reasons for it. I'm not going to touch upon everything because the territory that I have to cover is more around direct tax. But this is a thought I wanted to share because the audience here is not the typical chartered accountants who are interested to go into the minute details of the amendments to law, but it is a good cross section of the general public who in some sense have their own opinions and views to share with others. So I do not want to see this budget as something which has been a complete letdown, as some quarters have projected it. But of course there are others who have welcomed it, because in public you can't be too very critical of any move of the government. So if you see the paper, many of them have welcomed it, which in some sense is actually right. But even in matters of detail and the exercise which has been undertaken, there are many good things about it. And one of the good things, which is the subject that I am supposed to speak, is the direct taxes. This budget should not be seen in isolation, and you should connect it to the exercise which was carried out in September of 2019, where some rationalization and changes in tax rates were made. So you will have to see it in totality. You should not see this budget in isolation. Now, what is the attempt with regard to the direct taxes as far as this finance minister is concerned? In 2009, the then government undertook this exercise of creating a new direct tax code. See, the Indian tax code has become unduly complicated and burdensome over the last 61 to 2020, is almost 60 years. It has been changed and modified without relentlessly year after year. It's like the field being plowed every year to put the crop, but you can't keep changing the law with that kind of aggression and frequency and expect it to be still sane and easy to deal with. So the tax code has become extremely complicated over the years, and so many objectives the government wanted to promote in the course of economic policy making found its way into the tax law, unfortunately, and then it became completely unwieldy and even difficult for expert professionals to comprehend. So in 2009, the government set up a committee and they came up with a draft new law, which I think was not acceptable to the business and industry and to the experts, because I think it was a very shallow effort. My own recall is that they very poorly understood how the sections had to be worded. So it was not really meeting the objective. So a rerun was done, and I think that report got submitted just before the previous government exited office in 2014. So the new government also had, as part of their election manifesto, put out that they wanted to improve the tax compliance in the country, make it easy for people to deal with taxation and to end tax terrorism. I think that was one of the election manifesto points of this earlier government, of this government. And they made a revised attempt to bring about a new tax code sometime in 2017. And that code got, the recommendations got compiled, and I think they got submitted sometime in the early 2019. But this code was never made public. This is one of those inexplicable issues as to why a committee constituted by drawing people from experts, public, made a report, and that the report was never made public. Maybe there are strong reasons to it. But the recommendations of the committee was getting sort of socialized in some form. The newspapers were picking up some inputs, and there were various aspects of this report was getting socialized in public. So one understood that there is a particular design which this direct tax code, the new code, was coming up with. And what I see in the last September 2019 changes and the changes which are being brought about in the budget is an endeavor to try and adhere to some of the recommendations of the code. I am also not aware in terms of the details of what has been recommended, but one sort of connects to what one has been reading in the media and see that there is a particular design which they want the direct tax law to take in the years to come. So there is an intent to create a structural change to the concept of computing, levying income tax in India. And what is it? As I was saying, that the law had become extremely complex over a period of time. So many concessions and exemptions were being administered through the law to sort of cater to different lobby groups. And naturally, when there is a concession, there is a tendency to exploit it. People who are really not eligible try to take advantage. So there will be protective sections to plug those loopholes. So this became very unwieldy. So at some stage, I think everybody got tired of the way the tax law was operating. And the desire was to have a simple system whereby you clearly know what the taxes you need to pay. The method of computation is very easy. The deductions, concessions are eliminated, and the tax rates become more moderate. I think this has been the underlying philosophy of this committee which came up with this direct tax code. And I feel that this government, and especially this finance minister, is wanting to build the base to create a tax system which perhaps over the next few years will really reflect something which is truly more modern, and something which even the not so great experts will be able to understand. The businessman will feel comfortable with to sort of compute the taxes, and it will be not a showstopper in terms of doing business. See, taxation is not something that should come in the way of you doing business. It should not hurt your competitiveness. One of the indices that Mr. Shekhar showed was where does India rank in the global competitiveness index. Tax is one of the very fundamental thing which drives the global competitiveness. There could be so many other factors like infrastructure, availability of human capital, and overall environment to promote innovation. All that is very much there. But when global capital moves, one of the very key aspects that it looks for is the ease of tax compliance and low tax rates. So money starts moving where this exists. And clearly that is one area where the Indian economy and the system has been very much behind in terms of how the tax system have been perceived by the global capital. So there was an urgent need to make changes, and the reality is you can't overnight change this tax code because there is such amount of sensitivity about the revenue measures and its impact on the budget, the fiscal deficit and the money available to be spent on welfare measures and for capital expenditure by the government. They can't overnight create a very, very modern, highly competitive tax regime and not upset all that the budget represents. You can't do that. But in spite of that, the first exercise of changing the corporate tax structure resulted in close to 1,45,000 crores of revenue loss, which got subsequently revised to 100,000 crores because of the way they sensed the industry was taking the new rates. And now they have come up with two sets of changes which have resulted in additional 65,000 crores of revenue loss as projected, which cumulatively comes to a very significant figure in the overall quantum of revenue collected by the government. So to achieve the end goal, it is not possible to do it in 1 year. So it has to be a gradual process. So what exactly is the design change? It's a structural change. The change is you move away from a highly incentive-ridden tax law to a simple tax law where this is your profit as per books, this is the tax rate, you pay so much. And that was the first step taken in September 2019, where they brought in a rate of tax of 22% and 15%, which is unthinkable in a country where when I started my career in 1982, 1983, the tax rate was 70% for corporate with a surcharge. In 1985, when the tax rate was brought down to 30%, Mr. Palkiwala in his speech, the budget speech, said that that was the best budget in the 30-year period that he had seen. So 1985, so go back 30 years. Mr. Palkiwala said this is the best budget because the tax rate had been brought down to 30%. Now we have tax rate at 15% in this country, which perhaps is one of the lowest among countries which are typically into manufacturing. You may have tax rate of 12%, 10% in countries which have very little manufacturing. We have a trading country like Hong Kong or Ireland, or some of these countries will have very low tax rates, but they are not countries which have a complex economy like what India has. So this is one of the lowest rates, and that rate is accessible if you do not claim any incentives. But then the government had a challenge. You cannot do away with the old regime and then just bring the new regime in, because a lot of vested interest gets affected if you remove over the old regime. So they had to create this diarchy of you continue to use the old regime with the old tax rate, or you shift to the new regime with the new tax rate. I'm giving you the option. This is, I think, very, very essential, and it is very well thought out. And my own guess is, it's a question of time the old regime will get phased out, because the people who have been fed with this system of incentives, tax holiday zones, no tax, you go to Ladakh, no tax, this is a kind of a mindset that have got created into the Indian business ecosystem. Overnight, if you remove it and say, I'm only putting 15%, they'll all be up in arms. So you can't do that. So this was a very carefully calibrated measure by which they said, those who are comfortable with the old regime continue, dividend warrant. And in fact, I think it is practically stopped now. So everybody gets into the bank account. So it's not difficult to track movement of money through dividends. So this, in my opinion, has been an anomaly that has been existing in the law. It suited many people who are high income earners, it suited them, but it's very distorted. So this budget does away with it. No more tax will be paid by the company. It is only the people who earn the dividend will pay the tax. This will clearly be advantageous to people who are low tax bracket, who have income levels at a lower threshold. They will not have to pay any tax. But those who are having significant income, they will pay tax at the higher rate of 30% or whatever it is. And that is the most just and reasonable system. So it is a very good thing that with great difficulty the shift has happened. And this shift apparently cost the government 25,000 crores. I don't know how the numbers have been worked out, but we'll believe it on face value. So in a year where there is a significant pressure on revenue and there are so many other compulsions in terms of where to allocate money, this is a bold step by the finance minister to make this departure at this point in time. This again perhaps has come through the direct tax code and as part of the structural change. Now, associated with this, there will be some compliances. The company will have to deduct tax. I think they will have to deduct tax above 5,000 rupees of dividend, which is a very high threshold. I can't think of common, in fact, I don't get dividend of more than 5,000 from any company. If I take myself as a representative case, 90% of the dividend earners won't have any TDS. If somebody gets more than 5,000 rupees dividend from a company, he must be at the top 3 percentile of income earners in the country. You can't complain if there is a TDS because you automatically get credit. And it's not a compliance issue for the company because now everything is automated, everybody has moved into ERP systems and all that. So if you hear any criticism around this, I can assure you that that is a motivated criticism. It is a very ill thought out criticism. This is a very good step. But this also moves to changing the system of taxation for mutual funds. That perhaps affects a lot more people because today many people are in the mutual fund schemes. So mutual fund scheme, if you are under the dividend scheme, this tax will apply. See, this concept of mutual funds and the way it is taxed in India is again very distortive, but it's an industry which has its own ecosystem compulsion, so I don't think it can be changed. I don't want to spend too much time getting into this. So some immediate impact or anomaly may be felt, but it's all manageable. If you have the right consultant, they will tell you how to handle it, so it will not really impact anybody. So this change in dividend taxation is, in my opinion, very positive to the economy and not, as I saw one or two comments in the media today, in the paper, where people said, no, this is not a good idea, dividend tax should be entirely abolished. This is not a utopian idea. See, you are in a country which is still in all the indices so low. If you abolish all taxes, then where is the means for the government to run its administration? So we can't be too impractical. We can't be too theoretical. So this three constitutes the structural change. In terms of improving the ease of business, there are not very sensational measures, but I think there are good steps. Startups, which are today a way of life. I'm sure every family has some youngster who is getting into a startup nowadays. So they are improving the tax benefits for startups. You can avail the tax concession even up to 100 crores over a period of any 3 years out of 10 years. So that's a very, very positive thing from giving fillip to startups. Tax audits are now applicable only above 5 crores, which is again a compliance burden being eased. Many chartered accountants will feel happy because I don't think many chartered accountants themselves are very happy doing tax audit. They would like to do something more qualitative, productive. So I'm sure Mr. Anand will give a recommendation. Actually, abolish audit up to 5 crores. Why only tax audit? Don't have audits itself. Make it easier for business people to do business when they are small. So MSME, etc. will benefit by this process. The third limb, I'm not getting into the other nitty-gritties of what is changed in terms of compliance, because there is some change that you can get an appeal admitted in the tribunal paying only 20%. These are all good moves to remove discretion, to make it more transparent. Anand mentioned about the e-appeal. E-assessment itself is yet to take off. I don't have a personal knowledge, so I don't want to really sound very authoritative on this. But I'm only seeing it from a distance. These are trends which are unavoidable. In fact, my own feeling is to bring down the time taken in courts for disposal of cases. Personal hearing should be abolished. Why is the need for two lawyers to come and argue on a tax matter? Both file their submissions, the judge can view it in his home, and then if he really thinks there is such a complex matter, he needs more input, he can call for hearing. Otherwise, most of the cases are covered by some judgment and some old ITR. So it doesn't really require personal hearing. Now look at when a personal hearing happens. One advocate has come, the other fellow is on his feet in another court. There is only one lawyer who can appear in all cases, so he can't be in all the courts. So it's a waste of time, criminal waste of time. So criminal cases I understand because there is a cross-examination, the accused is there, the other people are there, the witnesses are there. You can't do a e-hearing on a criminal case. But tax cases, I have appeared in tax courts for 20 years. I've never seen the need for you to be present to make an impact at all. You make an impact maybe for other reasons. Your knowledge, pure information, your personal presence is of really no consequence. So this is a good move, but it will fail in our context because of the personalities involved. It's not because of the system. So those are issues dealing with the ease of business. There are some changes which are happening, which I myself not fully familiar. In case anybody is curious, I have a couple of experts here who have come from my old company, so they can chip in with some answers. There are changes with regard to some e-commerce related transactions. There is a concept of significant economic presence, because the old concept of permanent establishment, business connection were all associated with businesses that function physically. Now, a lot of things have moved to electronic, digital way of functioning. 50 to 60% of the global economy today is electronic and digital. So the concepts which were relevant when physically goods were being done, moved and consumed, a lot of things of today, consumption itself is moving into electronic form. So those principles don't hold good. So there is a change globally in terms of how these businesses should be taxed, and India, I think, is in the forefront of devising these global best practices. So some changes have come in the law, both in terms of how the presence will be determined, tax will be computed. I think there's a flat percentage of tax. There is also some tax collected at source on payments being made to these businesses that will kick in. But I don't think any of that is something that is going to impact the common man. These are things which are relevant for people in business, in those businesses, and I don't think there can be cause for complaint. If an Indian citizen avoids being taxed in any other country in the world by virtue of his period of stay in those countries, so there are people who are the so-called global citizens. They are not taxable anywhere because they are not 182 days in India. They are not in any other country also. They manage to stay away from tax net everywhere. I don't know how many people are there, but now the law says if you don't pay tax in any other part of the world and you are a citizen of India, you pay tax. I think it's a very, very sensible move. And while it may not be hundreds of thousands of people, but it may be people who are really the high flyers, because all the time you are flying, you are not in any country and you don't pay tax anywhere, and these people should be brought to tax. The last aspect is the taxpayer charter. That is still not come into law as a draft, but I think it's a very important step, and it will be only appropriate for associations like Hindustan Chamber and others to feed some inputs to the government as to what should be there in the charter. I think it will be a very important development. One of the things that I recall, in 1986, the law which had a provision in investment allowance then, some of the people who dealt with law then would remember, had a requirement that the government should give 3 years notice before removing investment allowance. The reason was that people make commitments to big capital expenditure. They need time to plan. So there was such requirement. And that was removed by the then Finance Minister, Mr. V.P. Singh. He removed the 3-year notice and he replaced investment allowance with a new scheme called investment deposit scheme. And I remember the budget speech of Mr. Palkiwala there in 1986 in Chennai, where he said that it was complete fraud for a government to go back on its own commitment. They had given a commitment that I will not change this law for 3 years, and they changed it. So So for the next 8 speeches that he gave, in every speech he had a reference to this. He said the government should not do it. So a promissory estoppel. Government should live by its word. So something like that perhaps should come into the taxpayer charter. For example, this new scheme of lower rate of tax, many people have a doubt. Will this last for 2-3 years? How do I choose this? What happens if I choose this and then they keep tweaking the rates? Because there is no restriction on the parliament's power to change anything. But how do you get the comfort that there will be no go back on these things? Because once you opt, you can't get out. There are so many conditions and all that. So I think it's very important, whether as part of the taxpayer charter or as part of anything else, the parliament should say that, especially people who come from outside and invest, they have so many options. India is not the only place to come. And there will be a stability to certain tax dispensation, like concession or whatever. There will not be frequent changes which upsets. So I think this is a very fundamental thing which I would like to see in a taxpayer charter, that there are no frequent changes, tinkering changes which completely upset. You set up your system for something, suddenly it changes, it creates a problem. So with this, I would thank all my good friends on the dais who have been my professional friends for almost 4 decades for inviting me and asking me to speak in this forum. Thankfully, I didn't have to get into too much of technicalities, which I was anyway not so much prepared. And I thank